Sheila, you too.
Baby, wait. It's not what you think.
In my own house with my own sister.
The day Cynthia found out her best friend was sleeping with her husband, she was standing in the kitchen frying plantain, and the smell of burning oil never left her memory again. She had noticed the signs. She just refused to believe them, because you don't believe something like that about a person you grew up with, a person who braided your hair when your mother was too tired, a person who cried at your wedding, a person whose name you gave to your firstborn daughter as a middle name. You don't believe it until you can't deny it anymore. Cynthia and Sheila had been inseparable since they were 7 years old. Same compound in Warri, same school uniforms, same catechism class, same everything. When Cynthia's father lost his job and they couldn't pay school fees, it was Sheila's mother, Mama Sheila, that fat, loud woman with the big hat, who paid quietly and told nobody. When Sheila's brother died in a road accident, Cynthia slept at their house for 2 weeks, holding Sheila through every night. That was the kind of friendship they had, the kind people point to and say, "See those two, that is real love." But love has a way of being tested, and some people fail the test without shame. Cynthia had married Stanley 4 years ago. Big wedding, St. Augustine Cathedral, 300 guests, Asoebi in deep burgundy and gold. Sheila was chief bridesmaid. She gave the toast at the reception and made everyone cry with how beautifully she spoke about Cynthia. "This woman," Sheila had said into the microphone, voice breaking, "has been my sister, my mirror, my safe place. Stanley, if you ever hurt her, you will answer to me first." The guests clapped. Stanley laughed. Cynthia wiped her eyes. Nobody laughed now. It started with small things. Stanley coming home late with new excuses. His phone always face down on the table. A faint perfume on his collar, not Cynthia's brand. She noticed. She asked. He denied. She pushed. He called her insecure. Then one Thursday afternoon, Cynthia's neighbor, a nosy woman named Mama Toby, who Cynthia had always tried to avoid, knocked on her door with something in her eyes that was half pity, half excitement. "I don't want to enter your matter," Mama Toby started, which in Nigerian language means "I am very much about to enter your matter." She showed Cynthia a photo on her phone. Stanley's car, parked outside Sheila's apartment building at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, 3 times in 1 month, 3 different Wednesdays. Cynthia looked at the photo for a long time. Then she went back to her kitchen and stood over the frying plantain like nothing had happened. She stood there even as the oil began to smoke, even as the plantain began to burn. She just stood there, staring at nothing, while her whole world rearranged itself into something she no longer recognized. That evening, she called Sheila. "Come and eat, I cooked." Sheila came. She sat at Cynthia's table. She ate Cynthia's food. She laughed at Cynthia's jokes. She hugged Cynthia goodnight. And Cynthia looked her in the eyes, her sister, her mirror, her safe place, and saw guilt wearing the face of innocence. That was the night Cynthia decided she would not cry. Not yet. First, she would know everything. Then she would decide what to do with the truth. To understand how Sheila could do this, you need to understand where Sheila came from, and more importantly, where she believed she was going. Sheila had always been the prettier one, everyone said so, and they didn't even try to whisper it. Sheila fine past her friend though. That Sheila, if she had money to match that face, She had grown up hearing it, and somewhere along the line, she had begun to believe that beauty was a currency and that she had been underpaid her whole life. Her mother, Mama Sheila, was a good woman, but a suffering woman, a petty trader who woke at 4 a.m. every day to go to the market, whose hands were always rough, whose back was always aching, whose prayers were always long because they had to cover so many needs. They were not poor in the way that breaks bones. They ate, they had a roof, but they were poor in the way that humiliates. The kind of poor where you smile at other people's celebrations and swallow something bitter. Cynthia's family had been the same, but somewhere in their 20s, things split. Cynthia found Stanley. Stanley was not rich, not oil money rich, not politician rich, but he was comfortable. He had a steady job in a construction company, drove a clean Toyota Camry, owned a flat in a decent part of town. Not luxury, but stability. And stability, for a woman who grew up watching her mother count coins, felt like paradise. Sheila watched all of it from close range. The wedding, the flat, the car, the way Stanley looked at Cynthia like she was the only person in every room. Sheila told herself she was happy for her friend. She told herself this every day like a prayer. But prayer said through clenched teeth don't always reach heaven. She was 29, still single, still in a one-room apartment, still sending her CV to companies that never called back. The men who came wanted one thing and offered nothing. The church told her to wait on God. Her aunties told her her standards were too high. Her mother quietly worried but didn't say anything because she didn't want to add to Sheila's pain. Then, one evening, Stanley came to drop something off at Sheila's place when Cynthia was traveling. A simple thing, a package Cynthia had asked him to deliver. He came in, they talked. He noticed how tired she looked. He asked, she told him more than she planned to. He listened. He didn't judge. He came back the following week. Sheila told herself it was just friendship, emotional support, nothing physical. She lied to herself for 3 months before she stopped lying. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It happens in small surrenders, a conversation that goes too long, a touch that lingers, a secret that becomes shared. By the time Sheila admitted to herself what was happening, she was already in the deep end. And instead of swimming out, she told herself she deserved to be there. She deserved something good. She had suffered enough. And if that good thing had Cynthia's name on it, well, Cynthia would find another good thing. Cynthia always landed on her feet. This is the lie that evil people tell themselves, that their victims are strong enough to absorb the wound, that taking from someone who has is different from stealing. It is not different. It is exactly the same. And in a town where everybody knew everybody, and walls had ears, and neighbors had eyes, the truth was already moving. Slow at first, then faster, like smoke before fire. Cynthia could smell it. She just didn't know yet how large the fire was.
If you are feeling this story right now, subscribe and turn on your notifications. This is only the beginning. 3 weeks after the plantain burned, Cynthia was ready. She had not confronted Stanley yet. She had not called Sheila back with accusations. She had done something more dangerous. She had gathered evidence, quietly, calmly, with the cold focus of a woman who has decided that tears will come later. She had gone through Stanley's second phone, the one she wasn't supposed to know about, the one he kept in his office bag, on a night he fell asleep on the couch. She had read everything, every message, every voice note, every location shared. She had sat on the bathroom floor from midnight to 3 a.m. reading, and she had not made a sound, not one sound. She pressed her hand against her mouth and she held it all in because their daughter, their 3-year-old daughter, Amara Sheila, was asleep in the next room. Amara Sheila, named after both of them. That detail nearly killed her. On a Saturday morning, she called a family meeting. She told Stanley she wanted his family to come, his mother, his elder brother Lawrence, his aunt, who had been like a second mother to him. She said she had something important to discuss. Stanley assumed it was about the house extension they had been planning. He came in relaxed, in his Saturday Ankara, smelling of his usual cologne. He did not know that Cynthia had also called Sheila. Sheila walked in wearing a lemon yellow dress, carrying a small bag of chin-chin for Amara, smiling that wide smile that had fooled everyone for years. She stopped when she saw the gathering. Her smile flickered just for a second, but Cynthia saw it. Cynthia saw everything now. "Sit down," Cynthia said. Her voice was quiet. That was the most frightening thing about it. No shouting, no tears, just quiet like the surface of deep water. She stood in the middle of the room and she spoke. She did not scream, she did not curse. She laid out every fact like a woman presenting evidence in court. Dates, times, messages. She read some of them aloud, and the room went so silent you could hear the ceiling fan cutting air. Stanley's mother covered her mouth. Lawrence looked at his brother with something that was no longer recognition. Sheila sat very still, staring at her own hands. Stanley opened his mouth twice and closed it both times. "I am not here to fight," Cynthia said when she was done. "I am here so that everyone in this family knows what has been happening inside my marriage. I am here so that nobody can say they didn't know, so that nobody can stand at a funeral or a church service or a family gathering and pretend they were innocent." She looked directly at Sheila. "You named my daughter," she said. Her voice cracked. "Just one. Just one. You stood at my wedding and gave a speech about protecting me. You ate my food in my house while you were sleeping with my husband." Sheila finally looked up, and what Cynthia saw on her face was not the shame she expected. It was something worse. It was the face of a person who had rehearsed a story, a version of events where she was also a victim, where circumstances had swept her along, where love had confused her, where she never meant for any of this to happen. "Cynthia," Sheila started. "Don't." One word, flat as stone. The room was shaking, not physically, but in the way rooms shake when something permanent happens inside them. Stanley's aunt had started praying quietly in the corner, which in Yoruba culture means things have gone beyond human control. It was Lawrence who finally spoke. He stood up, looked at his brother and said, "Stanley, you have disgraced this family." Stanley bowed his head. But the real moment, the moment nobody in that room would forget for the rest of their lives, came when Cynthia picked up her daughter from the floor where she had been playing, unaware of everything, and she looked at the child's face, a face that had Cynthia's nose and Stanley's forehead, and a name that now felt like a wound, and she held her tight. Then she turned to everyone and said, "I will be fine, but I want all of you to remember what you saw today, because I will not be explaining myself again." Then she walked into the bedroom and closed the door. Outside, nobody moved for a long time. What happened next was not what anyone expected. Stanley's family, to their credit, was ashamed. Loris came to Cynthia privately and apologized on behalf of the family. Stanley's mother cried and said she had not raised her son to be this kind of man. There were genuine efforts at family intervention, uncles meeting, prayers being said, a pastor called. But Sheila's side of things was different, because Sheila had family too, and Sheila had a church. Their church was one of those big Pentecostal assemblies that packed 3,000 people every Sunday. Bright lights, powerful choir, the kind of pastor who wore suits that cost more than most members' monthly salaries. The church where everyone knew everyone, where reputation was everything, where women's worth was measured in how neatly their lives were arranged. Cynthia and Sheila both belonged to the women's discipleship unit. They both served, they both gave, they had both been commended from the pulpit. When the story broke, and in a community like theirs, stories always broke,
The church's reaction was its own special kind of cruelty. The pastor called both women in, separately. To Cynthia, he said, "Sister Cynthia, we will be praying with you and Stanley for reconciliation. Marriage is a covenant. We do not throw away covenants." Cynthia looked at him. "He slept with my best friend, sir." The pastor nodded slowly. "Yes, and that is a sin, but we must also examine what may have pushed him." Cynthia stood up and left. She did not slam the door. She closed it quietly, the same way she had closed the bedroom door at the family meeting, like a woman who no longer had energy for certain kinds of foolishness. But what they did to Sheila was something else entirely, because around this time, it came out, through the merciless grapevine of the neighborhood, that Sheila was pregnant. 3 months. The pregnancy changed everything in the most painful way. In the church, suddenly, Sheila was the fallen woman, the Jezebel, the home wrecker. Members who had smiled at her on Sundays for years began to look away in the corridors. Women who collected offering with her now whispered when she passed. Someone left a printed note in her Bible one Sunday. She didn't tell anyone what it said, but she came home and didn't eat for 2 days. The same pastor who had told Cynthia to examine what she may have done to push Stanley away stood at the pulpit and gave a sermon about strange women who destroy homes without mentioning names, but looking in a direction that 300 people understood perfectly. Sheila's mother, Mama Sheila, that fat, loud woman with a big heart, sat in that church and heard that sermon about her daughter. She sat very still. She did not cry in the building. She waited until she got home. Then she sat in her small kitchen that smelled of firewood and fried fish, and she cried the kind of cry that old African women cry, silently, deeply, like something being wrung out from the inside, because she had worked her whole life to give her daughter a future, and now the child's name was being used as a sermon illustration. Cynthia heard about the note in the Bible. She heard about the sermon, and something complicated moved through her, because this was the woman who had betrayed her, who had broken something in her life that could never be fully repaired. She should have felt satisfied. She didn't. She felt sick, because she knew in her bones that the church was not protecting her. It was not standing for righteousness. It was doing what it always did, punishing the woman who could be seen while protecting the institution that couldn't afford to be questioned. Stanley still attended church. He sat in his usual seat. He shook hands. People patted his back and said, "Brother, we are standing with you." His sin was a struggle. Sheila's sin was a spirit. Cynthia stopped attending, not with drama, just quietly stopped going. One Sunday morning, she put Amara in her best dress, and instead of church, she took her to the park. They bought ice cream, they watched birds. Amara laughed at something, and the laugh was so pure, so untouched by all the adult ugliness around her, that Cynthia sat on that bench and finally let herself cry. Not for Stanley, not even fully for herself. She cried for the girl she had been, the one who believed in forever friendships and honest men and churches that told the truth. Then she wiped her face, bought her daughter another ice cream, and decided it was time to build something new. The divorce was not easy. It was never going to be easy. Stanley fought it at first, the way men fight things when they realize the consequences are real. He came with apologies. He came with roses, which Cynthia found almost comically wrong-footed. He came with his mother, who cried and begged and invoked God and tradition and the welfare of Amara. He came with a marriage counselor from the church who Cynthia had never met before and who kept using the phrase season of testing. Cynthia was patient through all of it. She let people talk. She let people pray over her. She gave everyone their chance. But she had made her decision on that bathroom floor at 3 a.m., reading messages in the dark, and no amount of roses or counseling or tradition was going to reach back in time and change what had been done to her. The divorce went through. She kept the flat. Lawrence made sure of that,
pushing hard within the family to ensure his brother didn't leave Cynthia with nothing. Stanley moved into a rental. He paid child support without trouble, at least in the beginning, perhaps because he still carried enough shame to behave. But life for Cynthia was not suddenly easy just because she had made the right decision. Right decisions are rarely comfortable. She was 31, divorced, with a 3-year-old daughter, working a mid-level administrative job that paid enough to survive, but not enough to breathe. Her mother was supportive but tired. The older woman had her own health problems and couldn't help much beyond words. Some friends rallied. Others disappeared, the way people disappear when your story becomes inconvenient to their idea of how life should work. There were nights, too many of them, when Amara was asleep and the flat was quiet, and Cynthia sat with a cup of tea gone cold and felt the full weight of loneliness. Not the kind that looks dramatic, the ordinary kind. The kind where you cook a whole pot of soup and realize halfway through that it's too much for just 2 people. The kind where something funny happens and you reach for your phone to tell your best friend and then you remember. That was the grief nobody talked about. Not the marriage, the friendship. Because for all that Stanley had done, and he had done plenty, it was Sheila's betrayal that sat deeper. You can prepare yourself somewhere in your mind for a husband to disappoint. Men disappointing their wives is a story as old as the first garden. But your best friend, your sister, the person who knows your fears, your embarrassing stories, your worst moments, and chose to stay, that kind of person turning on you splits something that doesn't heal the same way. Cynthia grieved it like a death. Meanwhile, Sheila's life was unraveling in real time. Stanley did not stand by her. Of course he didn't. He had never intended to leave Cynthia for Sheila. That much became clear quickly. When the pregnancy became public knowledge, he retreated. He sent money once, then twice, then the messages became slower, then they stopped. Sheila had the baby alone, a boy. She named him Martin. Mama Sheila, who had every reason to collapse, didn't. She moved in with her daughter, tied her wrapper tighter, and showed up. That old woman cooked and cleaned and held the baby through the night while Sheila recovered, and she never once said, "I told you so," because she was the kind of mother who understood that punishment had already arrived without her help, and what her daughter needed now was not judgment, but ground to stand on. The neighborhood talked, the church talked. Social media got a version of the story that was 30% accurate and 100% cruel. Sheila survived it. Barely. She lost weight. She stopped wearing bright colors for a long time. She looked for months like a person standing at the edge of herself. But Martin, small, loud, hungry Martin, with his father's forehead and nobody's guilt, Martin was innocent, and something about holding an innocent thing can pull a person back from the edge. Cynthia heard about the baby through the grapevine. She heard that Sheila was struggling. She heard that Stanley had abandoned them both. She felt something she could not name. It was not forgiveness, not yet, and maybe not ever in the full, clean sense, but it was something adjacent, a kind of tired recognition. 2 women, 1 man, and a whole community that had punished both of them, while the man straightened his tie and kept moving. Cynthia didn't call Sheila. She wasn't ready for that, but she stopped wishing her harm. That felt like enough for now.
2 years passed. Things do not move in straight lines. Life is messier than that. But 2 years is enough time for certain truths to settle. Cynthia enrolled in an evening program, project management certification, something she had been putting off for years because Stanley had always found subtle ways to make her feel that her ambitions were inconvenient. She studied after Amara slept. She revised on weekends. She was the oldest in her cohort by 5 years, and she didn't care at all. She graduated. She got a promotion.
It was not a dramatic leap, not overnight success, not the kind of story they tell at motivational conferences. It was the slow, grinding, dignified climb of a woman who decided her life would not be defined by what someone else did to her. She moved to a better flat, 2 bedrooms, one for her, one for Amara. She bought a small dining table she had always wanted, the kind with the dark wood finish. She put a plant by the window. She learned to cook new things. She made new friends, careful ones who were chosen rather than inherited. She was not healed completely. She might never be completely, but she was building, and building felt better than waiting. Amara started school. She was sharp, loud, fearless, a child who had absorbed her mother's quiet strength and translated it into something noisier. Cynthia watched her daughter and felt something she struggled to name. Not happiness exactly, something more durable than happiness. Purpose. Stanley in those 2 years had become a quieter story. He had tried briefly to pursue another woman, a younger woman, someone new to the area, and the relationship had collapsed when the woman discovered what kind of man she was dealing with. He still paid for Amara, still showed up for visits, still performed the minimum of fatherhood. He had aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. Something in him had gone dull. The charm that had once worked on 2 women who loved each other had nowhere to land now. And then came the Sunday. Not a church Sunday. Cynthia had found a new, smaller congregation, nothing like the old one. A community-based group that met on weekday evenings and didn't have a pastor with expensive suits. Just people reading scripture and checking on each other. She had found it through a colleague and stayed because it felt honest. No, this Sunday was a different kind. Cynthia was at the market, the main open market, the kind where you bump into everyone eventually, buying tomatoes for a pot of stew. Amara was pulling at her hand asking for fried yam from a woman 3 stalls down, and she saw Sheila. Sheila saw her at the same moment. There was a whole crowd between them, noise everywhere, sellers calling out, generators humming, motorbikes passing, the smell of raw fish and fresh pepper and dust. They looked at each other across all of it. Sheila looked like herself again, mostly. She had put on a little weight. She was carrying Martin on her back, and the boy, now nearly a year and a half old, was asleep with his cheek pressed against his mother's shoulder and his fists curled up like he was holding on to something important. Cynthia looked at that child, then at Sheila. Sheila's eyes were asking something that she had no right to ask, and every human need to ask. They were the eyes of someone who had done a terrible thing and knew it. Not asking to be excused, not asking for pretending, asking only to be seen as still human. Cynthia stood there for a long moment. Amara was still pulling her hand, still asking for fried yam, completely unbothered by the weight of everything the adults around her carried. And maybe it was Amara. Maybe it was Martin asleep on his mother's back, innocent and unknowing. Maybe it was just 2 years of carrying something and realizing that carrying it further would only hurt the carrier. Cynthia walked across the crowd. She stopped in front of Sheila. She did not hug her. She was not ready for that, and she would not perform a forgiveness she hadn't completed yet. She was done performing things. But she looked at the boy on Sheila's back, at small, sleeping Martin, and she said quietly, so only Sheila could hear, "He looks healthy." Sheila pressed her lips together. Her eyes filled. She nodded. "He is. He's strong." A pause. The market thundered around them, indifferent. "Good," Cynthia said. Then she took her daughter's hand and walked to the fried yam woman and bought the child her food. She didn't look back. Not because she was cold, but because she had learnt the hard way, the expensive way, the way that cost her sleep and tears and years, that the most powerful thing a woman can do after being broken is to look forward, to keep walking, to feed her child and build her table and water her plants and show up for her own life. Justice had not arrived as punishment. It had arrived as distance, the growing, undeniable distance between who Stanley thought he was and who he turned out to be. It had arrived in Amara's laugh, in Cynthia's promotion, in a dining table with a dark wood finish, in a plant by a window that was still alive. Justice was quiet, but it was real. And Cynthia, walking away through the noise of the market with her daughter's small hand in hers and a bag of tomatoes on her arm, Cynthia was real too. More real than she had ever been.